Hello and welcome into this Tuesday, July 29th edition of the League Winners Fantasy Show. I am your host, as always, Dalton Salings, and today we will be getting into my top 12 tight ends for this fantasy season, as well as breaking down a little news just to dive into that. Malik Neighbors today went down with a shoulder injury at training camp. It's not supposed to be anything serious, just something to keep an eye on. Another injury to keep an eye on, Isaiah Likely had an ankle injury today. There's an MRI taking place tomorrow, and after that, we'll have more information on how the Ravens tight end will be impacted because of this injury. A little bit of training camp news that I've adjusted my rankings off of, that I'm drinking the Kool-Aid on. Giants running back Cam Skattebo has been getting a lot of positive reports. The rookie out of Arizona State. I have moved him up in my rankings, and also Tyrone Tracy down in my rankings a little bit. Not a huge move, but it is something I did. I still have Tyrone Tracy as an RB2. I moved up Cam Skattebo about 6 or 7 spots. Nothing ridiculous, but just something to keep an eye on if these reports continue that Skattebo is getting run with the ones. Something to keep an eye on. Now then, without further ado, let's dive into these tight end rankings. I've talked a lot about Brock Bowers already this year. He is my tight end 1 and the guy I'm most excited to draft. I am typically not a person who's taking a quarterback or a tight end early, those onesie positions as they're called. Brock Bowers is the exception to this. I think he's going to be head and shoulders above everyone else. I have him more than 4 fantasy points ahead of my tight end 2 on a per game basis. I just think he's that good, and the Raiders offense will flow that much through him. I think Geno Smith is an upgrade over the quarterbacks they were rolling out last season. I expect Pete Carroll to work hard to get Brock Bowers the ball in space. I know they brought in Ashton Genty. They might run the ball a little bit more, but I think that just creates more space over the middle for Brock Bowers to get the ball. I have him for 1,300 yards and 8 touchdowns this year. I think there's a world where Brock Bowers leads the NFL in catches this year. That may be a little bit of a hot take, but I think it's very possible that he does so. And he's one of 2 tight ends. I have over 100 catches this year. In the PPR format, you're not going to get better than him. He is going at the top of the second round right now in drafts in a 12-person league in PPR. I think it's worth it. I think that if you want to take that position and say, I'm done, I don't have to worry about it for the rest of the season, Brock Bowers is a pick you can make and feel good about. Now, then to move on to my tight end 2, I have Trey McBride. At the Arizona Cardinals, he is not really a touchdown guy. I expect that to continue. I don't think he gets a lot of touchdowns. I don't know if the Cardinals offense is good enough to generate him those touchdowns, but I have him as my tight end 2, around 13.5 fantasy points a game. He is probably the only other tight end I would be looking to draft of this upper echelon. Of course, there is this upper tier, and I'll get into where the tier breaks here, but he is going at the back of the second round. In my opinion, it's probably not worth it at that draft capital to take Trey McBride. I think he's a great player. I think he's in line for probably the tight end 2 production this season. I think the gap is just big enough between him and Brock Bowers that it's not worth a second round pick on Trey McBride. Now, if he slides into the 3rd or even the 4th round when actual draft season rolls around, that is a completely different thing, but I will not be taking Trey McBride this early over some of the other names that could be going around the 23rd pick. If you look across the association, you have guys like Ladd McConkey going right around that pick. T. Higgins is going behind that. JSN is going behind that. Tyreek Hill is going behind that. That's just the wide receivers. You can see plenty of players that I feel maybe a little bit more confident in going in that area. Jonathan Taylor is going around that range. Kyron Williams, guys that I would maybe rather take at the positions where you need more players rather than a Trey McBride. That's not an anti-Trey McBride take. It's just the fact that I don't think that he has enough upside or ceiling to be the tight end 1. I don't think anyone does if Brock Bowers is healthy. So that pick to me is not worth it. The tight end 3 off the board for me, my tight end 3, tight end 6 in drafts is Travis Kelce. Now, is he worth it in the 6th round where he's going right now? Potentially, yes. He's still a good tight end. I think in this Chiefs offense, especially if Rashee Rice misses time, we talked about it a little bit yesterday with the off-the-field issues. If Rashee Rice misses time, Travis Kelce could absolutely be a very valuable threat in this team, being the over-the-middle guy. We're going to see Xavier Worthy and Marquise Brown, if he's healthy, another guy that got banged up at practice today, on the outsides. Rashee Rice is supposed to be that over-the-middle threat. If he misses time with the legal troubles, Travis Kelce slides right into that role, and I think it's still worth it. Another name that could get pushed up as draft day gets closer, but in the 6th round is a decent value at tight end, who I have my tight end 3. And I think that's about his ceiling, is probably tight end 3. But if you want to take the shot on him, I am absolutely on board with that, and I will probably end up with a couple shares of Travis Kelce. The last name I have in this kind of tier before I would honestly wait a while to take my tight end is George Kittle. He's being drafted as a tight end 3. He's looking at about an early 4th round pick right now. So early 4th round pick, for George Kittle, decent value. I think he has a really high ceiling because of all the questions in the receiving room for San Francisco with Brandon Ayuk, Ricky Pearsall, even Juwan Jennings. A lot of question marks there. George Kittle has proved it year after year. He's being drafted as a tight end 3. I have him as my tight end 4. I think he has the upside to be the tight end 2 this year if it all breaks his way, if he stays healthy, and those question marks in the 49ers wide receiver room aren't answered. Kittle could be right there. He's a guy I wouldn't mind taking at his current value. I probably won't be taking a lot of him, but I very much so see the reasoning for drafting him, and I would not be shocked if he surprises people this season and finishes as the tight end 2. I think after these 4 guys, there's a big drop-off. In my points per game, I have them all very similar outside of Brock Bowers, and then I have a decently sized drop to my next tier of guys. And in this next tier of guys, basically from my tight end 5 all the way down to even my tight end 23, I'm okay with entering the season as my tight end 1. Any of those 4 guys at the top, I think you would be awesome to be able to get your hands on at the right price. And those are guys that I would be targeting, really minus Trey McBride, at their current draft capital. With that being said, if I don't get one of those 4 guys, I'm likely to wait a while on these guys. And I'll explain to you why as we go here. As my tight end 5 is Sam Laporta of the Detroit Lions. I think he could have a very good year. He's being drafted as the tight end 4. That's not a big value gap at all. He's about a 5th round pick right now, which is decent value for him. Late 4th, early 5th round pick. I think it'll be interesting to see what he can do without Ben Johnson. I think that's the biggest question mark for every Lions skill position player is how will the departure of Ben Johnson really affect them? I think Laporta is due for a little bit of a bounce back from last year. Not a guy I'm targeting, though, because I don't see the ceiling there. I think that the Lions have enough weapons with Jahmyr Gibbs out of the backfield, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Jameson Williams that we're probably not going to be seeing a ridiculous amount of Sam Laporta. If he can get the touchdowns in the red zone, that would be a big help. But if he doesn't get the touchdowns, I don't think he can keep up yardage-wise with a lot of the other tight ends above him or catches-wise. I think that does kind of set him back and make him a tier below these guys. He's probably going to be one of my least drafted players because he is going to be drafted like one of those top guys, but I believe there is a clear gap between the top 4 and Sam Laporta. The next 2 guys I don't mind nearly as much, and I have them as two of my biggest values in the tight end room. Those are going to be Dallas Goedert and Jake Ferguson, the 2 NFC East tight ends. I have Goedert just ahead of Ferguson by literally 1 fantasy point on the season. Not the same way, though. I think that we get it a little bit more touchdown-wise from Jake Ferguson, whereas Dallas Goedert has more catches and more yards. Both of these guys are going in the later rounds. I'm looking at them as 10th and 11th round picks right now. If you push the tight end down the board, you said, I'm not going to draft the tight end early, I'm going to push down the board. These are guys you could end up with. I have them ranked 10 and 8 spots ahead of their ADP, respectively. I think that they are safer picks. Philadelphia's going to throw the ball. Hurts likes Dallas Goedert. And Jake Ferguson of the Cowboys just got the contract extension, has little chemistry with Dak Prescott, and we know he can find ways to get him the football. I think both of these guys are going to be 2 of the big steals from the draft if you go tight end this direction. Guys, I'm going to be drafting a lot and that I like a lot and that aren't the biggest names, but are just going to give you steady production. I don't think these guys have a huge ceiling. I don't think they're going to have these boom weeks. I think you're going to get very consistent production from them at a very reasonable price, and that's why I have them where I have them. The next time I have is Dalton Kincaid. I'm still a believer in Dalton Kincaid for the Bills. He's being drafted right now as a tight end 13. I have him as my tight end 8, so a little bit of another value there. He's going just ahead of these other guys, and if you take Kincaid ahead of Ferguson and Goddard, I don't blame you in the slightest, because there is more ceiling, in my opinion, on Kincaid than there is on Goddard or Ferguson. His ceiling is potentially above some of those top 4 tight ends. I would not be shocked if he finished ahead of Kittle or Kelsey this season. Josh Allen has his receivers, but there's no clear wide receiver 1 there, and he's going to throw the ball a lot. And so the ball's going to go somewhere. This could be the year Dalton Kincaid breaks out. I'm not projecting a big breakout from him, but this could be the year it happens. And if it does, I wouldn't be shocked. Another name that I wouldn't mind drafting, I probably am going to take both Goddard and Ferguson over Kincaid, despite the ADP difference. But if you want to draft Kincaid and call your shot on that, I think it's a very realistic pick and something that I could do in drafts. Or if he ends up sliding past those other 2 guys, I am more than happy to have Dalton Kincaid as my tight end. Evan Ingram is my next tight end up at my tight end 9. He's being drafted as the tight end 9. He is now with the Denver Broncos. And I think Bo Nix will absolutely love throwing him the football. I think he's being accurately priced right there. The only problem is, and the reason why I won't have too much Evan Ingram, is because of the guys behind him. And you're going to see that a little bit of some of these guys who I think aren't really poorly priced, but I just have so much lower because I do like some of the savings you can get in terms of draft capital. Evan Ingram is a great player. If you take Evan Ingram where he's being drafted right now, about the 7th round, I can't blame you for that. I think he has a good ceiling. I think he could be very competitive with some of these other guys. I personally will not be taking him, though, because of the value I can get from Goddard, Ferguson, even Kincaid, and some of the other names we'll get to here shortly. There are values throughout this draft. So taking a guy in that spot at his value might not be the best pick when you can get really a savings later in the draft and use that pick on a skill position player like a wide receiver or running back that you need more of. But Evan Ingram does have a little bit of a ceiling with Bo Nix in that offense. I talked yesterday about how much I like Bo Nix this year. If you want to pair that with Evan Ingram, I can't blame you in the slightest. And I could absolutely bite my words on this. As a Giants fan, I love Evan Ingram as a player, but I could be biting my words on not taking him here. But at the tight end 9, I think that's about where he'll finish, which means there's not as much upside for him. My tight end 10, I have Tucker Kraft. He's going. I have him a little bit ahead of where he's going. He's being drafted between Kincaid and the Ferguson and Goddard area, which means I won't have too much of them because I do like those other 3 tight ends more. And I'm going to keep going back to those 3 guys as my almost just comparison for these tight ends. I think Tucker Kraft could have a great season. But like I talked about in the AFC North or NFC North video, if you haven't seen that, go check it out. But I talked about how the Packers have so many weapons. There's no guarantee who the guy's going to be. I think it could be Tucker Kraft. I think he's going to have a good season regardless of if it's him or not. But I would just prefer those other guys, the Ferguson, Goddard, and Kincaid, who I'm going to just keep talking about, over Tucker Kraft. My tight end 11 is Jonnu Smith still. He got traded to the Pittsburgh Steelers this offseason. I think it would be very interesting to see how him and Pat Freiermuth are used in this offense. I think Smith's a good player. I just don't know what to expect from him in this offense. He's being drafted as a tight end 8. That's going to continue to come down the board because he was obviously going to be potentially a top 5 tight end with the Dolphins. I had him ahead of Sam Laporta when he was on the Dolphins. So it'll be interesting to see where his draft value ends up being. He could turn into a draft day steal, but as of right now, where his capital's at and what his ADP is, he is not worth the selection because of what all is happening in that tight end room. Having 2 very good tight ends does really put a damper on both of them, in my opinion. And I think Jonnu Smith may potentially come down my board. I currently do have him statted out as a tight end 1. I wouldn't be shocked if he ends up down my board. And the reason why I'm kind of speeding through these guys is because I want to talk about every guy at least a little bit that I would be comfortable with as a tight end 1 and kind of show where that break is and explain that. So my tight end 12, so technically my last tight end 1 in my rankings is Dalton Schultz. I have him 15 spots ahead of where he's being drafted. He's an extremely late pick. He's being picked in the 200s right now. Pick 218 is where his current ADP is. That's ridiculous. He's a tight end 27 off the board. I just can't get my head around that. In Houston, there's no Stephon Diggs anymore, no Tank Dell for this year. I think CJ Stroud's going to have a little bit of a bounce back, and I expect him to get the ball to the tight end, to Dalton Schultz. I think he has 58 catches, about 600 yards. Nothing ridiculous, but I think he has a good season. If I have kicked tight end so far down the road, Schultz is a guy I do not mind drafting in the slightest. At pick 218, he's actually the really latest drafted tight end that I'm going to have in my rankings that I would be happy with as my tight end 1. I think it's really just impressive that he's here at that value, at that much of a discount. It almost makes kicking tight end down the road worth it. It makes drafting a second tight end worth it also. If you take a Dalton Kincaid, a Jake Ferguson, even if you take a Tucker Kraft a little bit earlier, you can come back and get Dalton Schultz late in the draft and have what I believe is going to be a very consistent player as your tight end 2. If it ends up being a bust, if for whatever reason Ferguson or Goddard misses, or you take even a guy that you like a lot that maybe we get to later, like a Hawkinson, that I'm going to get to here in a second, you have a guy who should be a safe player and who you can rely on if you need to plug him in at tight end and potentially even trade your other tight end. Having a second tight end as a trade chip, I am definitely not against drafting 2 tight ends. I've done it a lot in the past. Even though it is a onesie position, I don't mind having 2 of them on my roster. Dalton Schultz is almost the dream tight end 2 and a guy that I wouldn't be mad at as my tight end 1. The only thing with that is if you've kicked tight end 1 all the way down the road to there, you probably are going to need to draft him about a round or 2 ahead of ADP just to confirm that you can get him on your roster, because if you miss on him, there's not going to be a lot of guys after him that you're confident with as your tight end 1 entering the season. He's a guy that if you want to say I'm going to stream tight end, Dalton Schultz is a guy you could draft, and if he does end up not performing for whatever reason, you can begin streaming tight end from that spot. That concludes my tight end 1s. I want to run through a couple guys below that, just first the names and then highlight a couple guys. These are the names I feel comfortable with for this year at tight end as my tight end 1. I have Hunter Henry, TJ Hawkinson, Isaiah Likely, Kyle Pitts, Brenton Strange with the Texans as well, which is actually very interesting how I have him statted out. I'll talk about him in a second here. Chig Okonkwo, David Njoku, Cade Otton, Pat Freiermuth, Tyler Warren, and Colston Loveland. Talk first about the rookies, the 2 rookies, both having phenomenal camps. I think their ADPs are going to get a little too inflated, and I probably won't be having too many shares of them. As of right now, they are way too inflated in my opinion. I won't be drafting them, but those are guys that I'm okay with entering the season as my tight end 1 at the right draft price. Brenton Strange is a very interesting name. He's being drafted very highly. He's actually being drafted ahead of Dalton Schultz right now. And as the season gets closer, I'll probably talk about this Texans receiving room again. But I do think they can both be productive, similar to the way I have Jonnu Smith and Pat Freiermuth both in my top 24. I think they can both be productive. I think they're going to end up possibly all being values. Right now, Freiermuth and Jonnu Smith aren't values because they were recently put together in the trade. Strange and Schultz have been together all offseason. It'll be interesting to see as camp progresses and maybe even preseason if these guys get a go, what it'll look like for their workloads and things of who will be on the field. I wouldn't be shocked to see two tight end sets out of the Texans and getting both of those guys involved. Kyle Pitts is a name that's getting a lot of buzz right now. He's being drafted as a tight end 17. I have him as a tight end 16, right around his value. I'm not mad entering the season with Kyle Pitts as my tight end 1. That could absolutely come back to bite me, but I think it's very possible that he has a great year this year. And, this is the year he breaks out. He's apparently got a great rapport with Michael Penix. I'm willing to bite the bullet and be wrong on this, but I think that Kyle Pitts could have a great year. And I think he's absolutely fine to come in as a tight end 1. Isaiah Likely, I talked about a little bit, the injury could change this absolutely. And if he is out, I would move Mark Andrews into that spot of being comfortable to draft him. The last player I want to talk about right now is TJ Hawkinson. He's being drafted as a tight end 5 right now. I have him as a tight end 14. One of my biggest drop-offs, the other biggest drop-off being Mark Andrews. I just don't expect that much of J.J. McCarthy. It kind of hurts Jordan Addison and it hurts TJ Hawkinson. I don't believe Hawkinson has the same ceiling with J.J. McCarthy in terms of touchdowns. And I think that does hold him back in fantasy. I wouldn't be mad drafting him, but at the price of the tight end 5, I do not have any confidence in him being there. That is something I'm probably going to die on, is I will not be drafting TJ Hawkinson at his draft price. I won't be drafting him as a top 10 tight end. I have him as a tight end 14. If he's going in the top 10 tight ends, I'm not going to be drafting him. If he was to be ranked as a tight end 14, I would absolutely take him because he has a little bit more ceiling. Tight end 5 is his ceiling. I don't see a world where he performs better than that, and I could see him being as bad as tight end 20 this season. I am not going to be putting him on teams at that draft price for anything because there is no world in which it's worth it at the capital. The other tight end I have way below would be Mark Andrews, and that's just because of the 2 tight end set. I don't think that I think Likely's younger and better at this stage. I think Lamar Jackson is going to him more over Andrews, and that's why I have him so far down. People are going to draft Andrews over him. There's nothing I can say about that other than I think it's wrong. But I do have Isaiah Likely, if fully healthy, ahead of Mark Andrews. That concludes what I have to say about the tight ends. Still to come this week will be some more positional rankings. Also, football's here Thursday with the Hall of Fame game, and I hope to have a special episode out on Thursday with that in mind. So thank you very much for tuning in. Hope to see you next time.